Good morning. My name is Emma Sukanika, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to MHS's final installment of our premier 5-part webinar series, From Hire to Inspire, the EI series session titled The EQI Advantage, Driving Talent Strategies with Emotional Intelligence, presented by Jana van Heerden, Managing Director of JVR Consulting. We are thrilled to have you all here with us today. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. We would like to begin by telling you a bit about MHS. For over 40 years, MHS has provided trusted data-driven solutions across our core disciplines. Our MHS Talent Solutions help to drive success in professional settings. We understand the elements of effective leadership and the requirements for an effective workplace. With our capabilities and tool sets, we help clients identify and cultivate talent. Now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our presenter. Jana van Heerden is a registered industrial and organizational psychologist and the managing director at JVR Consulting. Prior to JVR, Jana held various key leadership roles within HR divisions at Capitec Bank in South Africa, where she spearheaded initiatives in succession planning, employee engagement, and people analytics, and organizational design. We are so privileged to have Jana with us today. Let's begin the webinar.
Emma, thank you so much for that great introduction. Good afternoon or hello, everybody. And really, I want to say welcome to this webinar this afternoon, where I will be focusing on really sharing some insights on the advantage of using specifically the EQI as a measure of emotional intelligence as part of your talent strategy. So over the next couple of minutes, I would really want to steer the conversation beyond just focusing on using the EQI as part of your selection process, but show how we, in partnership with our clients, have actually introduced the EQI across the entire talent strategy with 3 real South African case studies that prove return on investment. So let's dive in. Before we get to some of the detail, the roadmap for the conversation today is really going to start where I just want to kick off our conversation to frame why emotional intelligence must be considered a strategic imperative, and then to look at bringing it slightly closer to home, share some insights on the South African context and what our clients are doing in this space. But the majority of the focus of the conversation today is to share through 3 case studies, how we use real life scenarios where our companies in partnership with ourselves have used the EQI as a critical part of their talent strategy. And finally, to close off with key learnings that you will hopefully be able to take back into your organizations and apply. But before we jump into the detail, let's start with some foundation. And I think it's important that we ensure that there's a common understanding around emotional intelligence. So throughout the years, and I'm sure we've all have researched emotional intelligence before, have been confronted with various definitions about emotional intelligence that ranges from being a subset of social intelligence that involves the ability to monitor your own and others' emotions, to be able to discriminate between them, and then use the information to guide your thinking and your actions, to even being seen as the ability to perceive and manage emotions as a very integral part of sustaining your performance, but also to support with creating an engaging environment. But through all of this, emotional intelligence has always been considered an incredibly central and critical part of leadership, because it includes incredibly important traits that support one's ability to lead others, including yourself. So if we then take it back to the EQI's definition of emotional intelligence, it actually builds on the definitions that are available. And the EQI look at emotional intelligence as a set of emotional and social skills that determine how effectively we perceive ourselves, relate or build relationships with others, manage stress, and very importantly, make decisions. But from a business perspective, the question is, so why should we care? Why does it matter? So again, if you think about the complexity and the fast-changing world of work that we are confronted with, emotional intelligence really becomes a critical determinant of workplace effectiveness. So success isn't just about being the smartest person in the room and having the best technical skills. It is actually about how well people can perceive, understand, and manage emotions, not only their own, but also others. And the science backs it up. So research have linked high levels of emotional intelligence with very key characteristics, for example, enhanced interpersonal effectiveness, leadership capability across different levels, adaptability and resilience, especially in times of change, and even overall organizational health. Because these high IQ drivers actually increases better communication, establishes stronger relationships, and ensure greater resilience under pressure. One study actually found that developing emotional skills almost acts as a shield against emotional distress. In short, we must start considering emotional intelligence not as a nice to have, but as a must have to not only keep people performing, but also increase their retention and their intention to stay. So if we take all of that complexity into consideration, and we look at navigating the complexity of human capability and what people can actually achieve, we often encounter different terms like IQ and EQ and personality. And a lot of my clients say to me, but what is the difference? I think it's exactly the same thing. So it is important that although these three very different constructs are all very important for individual success and support your ability to build relationships, each of them have a very distinct role in supporting individuals in their leadership journey. So to make it very simple, if one talks about IQ, you typically measure your cognitive ability, so your brain processing capability. And that speaks to things like logic, memory, and problem solving. And those traits are quite stable. Personality, on the other side, describes who you are. So those are your preferences, your behavioral patterns that also tend to remain quite stable over time. With EQ, you actually focus on measuring how you manage your emotions and relationships. And here's the kicker, it is actually trainable. So in a nutshell, if your client ever asks you, so how do I differentiate between the three? You tell them the following. IQ gets you to the door, personality shapes your style, but EQ determines how far you go. So again, why is this thing important? So if we understand from a definition perspective why these three constructs are different, but also incredibly important, why do we need to differentiate between the two? And again, there are really 5 very critical points to keep in mind. First of all, if one looks at IQ, it only explains about 20 to 25% of the variance of people's life success. So their job performance, their health stage, their income levels, etc. So it leaves about 75 to 80% that is unexplained. And here is where EQ adds incremental predictability, especially in social and leadership context. As I've mentioned, EQ is also trainable. So unlike IQ and personality, which is largely stable, EQ can actually be significantly improved through structured learning and training interventions, for example, coaching. Then also, we've all had these brilliant but difficult individuals, those individuals with a very high IQ, but sometimes a very low EQ, that often bring the technical capability to the team, but struggle when it comes to building relationships within a team, leading others, and also in general, just building relationships. So these individuals could potentially hold a professional risk for your organization. As mentioned, EQ also drives mental health, where individuals with strong emotional regulation skills can help reduce their stress levels and manage the health risks by also enhancing their well-being. And in today's very interesting world, we actually manage our way of working through collaboration, where a team's EQ can actually drive their group performance. And the World Economic Forum have again ranked emotional intelligence as one of the top 10 skills in 2023. And finally, EQ is, again, a scientifically solid and measurable construct that can be measured very distinctly from IQ using validated tools. So again, if we go back to your T-shirt slogan, IQ can get you to the room, but EQ gets you to the top and keeps you there. So again, if we buy into the concept of emotional intelligence, we think it is important to measure. The next question that my clients always ask me, so how do we measure it? What is fit for purpose? What are the options that I can consider? And again, like lots of things in the world of psychometry, there's lots of options available. But if we look at the construct of emotional intelligence, the different measurement methodologies that are available are typically grouped into 3 different categories. So you get your ability-based measures that actually measure skills via a performance task. And these types of instruments are quite value-adding when you focus on senior leader or high-stakes recruitment activities. The second type of cluster focus on self-report or trait-based measures that measures the individual's perceptions or traits via questionnaire. And it's typically a self-report questionnaire. And then the last category is a bit of a mixed model where you combine your self-report with some performance elements or a broad range of categories. Now, for the EQI specifically falls within that self-report trait-based model that focuses on measuring the individual's self-perception or traits via the specific scientifically validated instrument. So again, the EQI as a measurement instrument developed by MHS is probably one of the most empirically supported and widely used measures of emotional intelligence. And what makes it so incredibly powerful is that it creates a visual or conceptualizes emotional intelligence as a multifaceted construct. So it provides a very detailed view, basically defining emotional intelligence across 5 composite sites or areas that you can see on the screen. And underneath these sites, you get an indication through 15 subscales of the specific emotional and social competencies that are incredibly important for overall emotional intelligence. It also includes a well-being indicator, which assesses overall happiness or life satisfaction, that again highlights specific areas for development within the individual and the team. So again, when we look at the different constructs, the different instruments, and very specifically then the EQI, the question would be then, if we have all these options, why specifically the EQI? And again, from personal experience and based on the feedback that we receive from our clients, there's a couple of very key points that substantiate or gives evidence around the advantage of the EQI. First of all, the instrument is rigorously validated and shows strong reliability across demographic groups. So it means it is a fair and consistent result no matter who takes the instrument. From a South African context, it comes with local South African norms that obviously for us is incredibly important when we interpret the results to ensure culturally relevant and unbiased views of the individual. Because it's been researched so consistently and extensively, I, as a practitioner, have access to decades of research, both globally and locally, to confirm the validity and the reliability of the instrument. And the output in the multiple report types really offers me the opportunity to integrate the insights into different stages of the employee journey, whether it is post the recruitment process or as part of a coaching journey or even to enhance a leadership journey. And each of these reports deliver very clear and actionable feedback that the individual can then take into their development decisions and next steps. Also, again, finally, the research really supports or substantiates the value add in that the EQI supports a range of important outcomes, showing us how to improve our physical and mental health, have a link with stronger academic and career performance, supports greater leadership effectiveness and job satisfaction, and also in cases where individuals can improve even their creativity, innovation, and decision-making. So in short, the EQI is not just an assessment for the sake of an assessment. It should really be considered a powerful instrument to help you select, develop, and empower your people throughout their talent journey. So again, then there's been a shift in how we approach emotional intelligence and how we think about measuring that as a construct. So again, traditionally, organizations have typically prefer to look at emotional intelligence only as part of a recruitment process, where they use the insights from an instrument like the EQI to spot candidates with very strong self-awareness, ability to manage stress, or even leadership potential. And again, linking it back to research, higher EQ predicts better performance, engagement, and retention. But here's the limitation. A one-time assessment is really just a snapshot at that point in time. It doesn't show you the growth potential or the drive for real change. So without follow-up, for example, post-assessment feedback, supported coaching, or dedicated training, the insights that you get from the instrument actually could go to waste. And that is why smart organizations treat emotional intelligence as part or as a continuous development tool and not just a pass or fail as part of a recruitment process. So when you then measure EQ using an instrument like the EQI, you get the value of using the insight as almost like a baseline measure across roles and levels. It can then dictate or give direction around very specific development, whether it's leadership or personal development plans. It can help you on a team level to identify strengths and development areas for more targeted interventions. And then very importantly, you can actually track progress to improve the insights that you get from the EQI by including other data sets, for example, performance scores or engagement scores for the team. So what I'm trying to say here is when you think about emotional intelligence as a golden thread throughout your talent and culture strategy, it stops being almost like a hiring checkbox and it becomes a potential culture builder because it drives the identification and development of key critical leadership capabilities like empathy, resilience, and performance across all levels. And this, in the South African context, is especially relevant. Now, as JVR, we have partnered with MHS over the past 20 years and have really played a leading role in ensuring that the EQI as an instrument is localized and the results speak for itself. So we've been critical or a critical part of ensuring that an updated South African norm group is available. We were part of a process of assessing around or looking at around 16,000 working adults results. And that really gives organizations, not just in South Africa, this clarity and certainty around the insights that I gain from the tool can give me accurate, relevant benchmarks that I can use as part of my talent strategy. Also, from a client perspective, again, the main approaches still remain to use the EQI in combination with, for example, a selection process, particularly for management and leadership roles on executive level. It is partnered with other types of assessments as part of a more integrated assessment battery where we look at including cognition and personality, and in some cases counterproductive work behavior and values. And that's again incredibly important when one looks at leadership potential and succession planning. Or it could be used in isolation as a critical part or input to a development initiative, for example, as input to a leadership journey or a coaching journey for an individual. But again, while the EQI still remains quite critical within selection, we can see that over a period of time, companies have started to buy in the value that the insights from the tool can offer beyond just the selection decision through development, coaching, and team interventions. And if you add then the value of an instrument like the EQ360 that offers multi-rater feedback, you can actually substantiate and support leadership pipeline and performance gains across the individual's performance journey. So again, trends in South Africa remain clear, very strong emphasis on looking at emotional intelligence for both selection and development of leadership and linking it then with the mobilization of leaders through leadership development programs and coaching. Looking at the EQ and specifically the insights from the EQI to support individuals in well-being and stress management interventions. And again, within this volatile environment and world that we operate in, such critical and value-adding insights. For a South African-based company, clients are still have a very strong preference for locally normed and culturally fair EQ instruments. And then, interesting enough, a very growing client base of using the team assessments and group emotional intelligence reports as part of team interventions. Therefore, I think the thinking at this stage is to consider emotional intelligence not just as something that needs to be assessed, but it is something that needs to be assessed, developed, and also scaled across people and teams. Now, if that is the theoretical part of our thinking around emotional intelligence and thinking about the instruments or methodology that we can use to assess emotional intelligence, let's make it very practical. So when you look at looking at something like emotional intelligence and considering introducing something like the EQI in your talent strategy, there are typically 3 very key career milestones in a company's talent pipeline where something like the EQI specifically can add immense value in helping businesses not only identify but support targeted development of their key talent. And those 3 key milestones really speak to, first of all, bringing young talent into the business, where the focus is really on identifying young potential to bring into your business as part of, for example, graduate development programs. Secondly, is to strengthen your bench strength or your existing leadership group through targeted development initiatives. And then lastly, and probably the most strategic part of the talent pipeline, is to plan for the future, where one can look at emotional intelligence, specifically the EQI, to support with the identification of real high potentials for future opportunities within the business. Now, I'm going to walk you through all 3 of these scenarios and actually show you through practical case studies how we have partnered with our clients using the EQI as a measure to support them in addressing these very key milestones in their talent journey. But let's start with scenario 1. So when we look at scenario 1, where the focus really is around identifying young talent to bring into the business, it is important to note at this stage that it is not focusing on just getting a bum and seat to fill the entry-level position. In the South African context, it is about addressing a very fundamental strategic need. The challenges in our country still remains that youth unemployment is significant. We have to look at building robust talent pipelines, and then also important, secure scarce skills, build a diverse talent bench strength, and also drive the transformation agenda. So typically in South Africa, organizations rely on strategic or more structured initiatives like a graduate development program to support not only the selection but the development of individuals as young talent within the business. But the environment is tough. We are faced with competition for STEM and other commerce-related graduates. There's definitely the threat of brain drain because the pounds and the dollars do talk loud. And there's also the complexities of finding almost a balance in expectations between a preference for hybrid work versus in-person onboarding. So in this case, the case study, our client is actually a major client in a player in the energy refinement and petroleum sector. The company is based in South Africa, around 3,000 employees with 1,000 service stations. And they run a structured 24-month graduate development program every 2 years. Their goal is very, very clear. They want to look at a process that is rigorous and scientifically robust to not only identify, but also to develop young talent and then to support the integration into future leadership roles after they've concluded the 24-month journey. So the assessment battery was again a combination of elements. First of all, obviously a key focus was on cognition. You wanted to look at the graduates' ability to problem solve and obviously their technical capabilities. From a personality perspective, to look at traits like innovation, learning agility, but also their motivation and drivers. But incredibly crucial was also to look at the contribution of emotional intelligence. So the emotional and social functioning, including specific focus on things like self-awareness, adaptability, and stress management. And the end goal was to provide insights to both HR and talent teams with substantiated data that would guide not only the selection decision, but also support the individuals beyond the selection decision in their development journey. So again, if we think about then implementing or using the EQI in this process, just to emphasize it again, when you're selecting new talent, especially graduates, you must look beyond cognitive ability. So when we introduce the emotional intelligence assessments like the EQI, this data is really not just for the selection decision. It is supposed to be integrated into the development journey of this individual from day number one, even starting as early as onboarding. And that is really where we can see the value of linking the EQ competencies with then the experience behavior of actually performing on the job and ensuring that there's high levels of engagement. Interesting enough, for this cohort that went through the assessment process, they actually showed specific strength in areas like social responsibility, assertiveness, and even impulse control. Now, if you translate this directly into strong interpersonal awareness and emotional restraint under pressure, I mean, what an excellent set of skills to have already as a young leader. However, it was actually clearly highlighted that from a development perspective, specifically independence and reality testing were areas of development for the whole group that needed to be explored. And this really suggested this specific cohort had still a bit of a reliance on guidance and needed to strengthen their objective decision making in the more dynamic environments. But again, if you think about this, what incredible insights as part of a coaching and development journey. Furthermore, apart from helping with the selection decision and seeing the strengths and development areas for individuals on an individual and group level, the insights also has allowed us in partnership with the client to actually group or categorize the graduates into meaningful groups based on their leadership readiness. And we could actually indicate which of the individuals were exceptional. So those would be the individuals that are ready for leadership, but need just a little bit of fine tuning from a development perspective, right down to individuals where significant development would be required. Furthermore, the EQ data also empowered us to make links to the EQ profile and leadership styles. So we could also put a lens of leadership style on the data to give the client feedback on the individuals and as a cohort, whom of them have more of a transformational, a transactional, or even a relationship leadership style. That again supports from a development perspective how one needs to engage with these individuals and ensure that they fit for purpose for the future. So again, if you look at all of this in combination, the outcome was really key insights that the client could take into not only the selection decision, but support the development conversation and the targeted approach with each of these individuals. So the data enabled the client to move from just guessing potential to actually have scientifically guided potential validation. And that really made the investment from a development perspective that much easier because it could be substantiated with data. Now, as a second case study, where we focus really on strengthening the capability of your existing leadership complement, we start talking about how do we identify and develop the leadership capabilities of our current leaders to strengthen our bench strength. Now, typically these individuals are busy in their mid-career, and the development is really designed on enhancing their leadership capability and hopefully through that process improve their adaptability to an ever-changing work environment. Now, development engagements in this space typically is supported by a structured leadership development program, or an individual's development plan is supplemented with different types of learning methodologies around the 70-20-10 learning model, where that it could include things like coaching or experiential learning, or even with more forward-thinking organizations, look at digital micro-credentials, where individuals can acquire specific skills very, very quickly. Now, again, in the South African context, there's always complexity. Companies are still faced with budget constraints, even after COVID has come and gone. We also still tend to find that there is resistance to the vulnerability that is required for honest feedback, especially in organizations where you have a very hierarchical structure or culture. Now, all of this needs to be managed amongst still immense performance pressure and the practical realities of working in South Africa with things like load shedding. So in this case, if we think about from a client perspective, one of our key clients, really a leading financial and health organization with around 14,000 employees based all over the world. They are already recognized for their excellence, but they face the reality that the changing world of work will require them to relook their thinking around what does effective leadership mean for them in a new environment. They have structured or put in place an executive leadership program. It's really aimed at strengthening their existing leaders. And the focus was on equipping them with some future fit capabilities around agility, resilience, and emotional awareness that is all really incredibly important to navigate this demanding VUCA business landscape. And they really recognize that the modern leadership challenge is requiring leaders to be self-aware, adaptable, and authentic. And that the leader must not only focus on their own delivery or driving results through their own delivery, but also need to create an environment that is humane and inspiring for their people. So for this client, we specifically leverage off the insights from the EQI leadership report. And it was really incredibly value adding to include the insights from this leadership report and focus on integrating the results around the 4 core pillars of an emotionally intelligent leader. That speaks to having authenticity, so where you can act with integrity and serve as a role model for others. Being able to coach, guide, and develop others, having insight or creating a vision and creating clarity and purpose for your people. And then also from an innovation perspective, be able to inspire others to think differently and challenge the convention. Each of the leaders received a detailed report that included insights not only on their strengths, but also their potential derailers and how that compares with the rest of the leadership group. And that was followed with a dedicated 90-minute coaching session facilitated by an experienced coach, where each of the leaders explored their individual report and how they could leverage off the insights and support of the coach to develop their leadership capability and subsequently improve their own performance and their team engagement. On a cohort level, again, data was incredibly important, and a couple of very interesting insights around the collective strengths were identified. Firstly, the decision-making composite was a collective strength that indicates, obviously from a leadership perspective, that they are generally make objective decisions and they remain quite composed under pressure. And that linked quite closely with the other area of strength identified around stress management that showed that this leadership cohort actually has a sense of resilience, positivity, and adaptability even in the face of change. However, the area that required the most collective development was self-expression. Very interesting. So some of the leaders struggled to express themselves constructively and demonstrate emotional independence. So in the coaching process, the focus was really on helping them almost overcome this initial defensiveness to engage with feedback more openly. The outcome was really transformational. The program supported individuals by, first of all, highlighting self-awareness, not only on their individual, but as a leadership cohort around their strengths and development areas. It supported the individuals to focus on their key elements of the individual development journey, but also really look at supporting them to improve resilience and better decision-making under pressure. It supported them with driving more authentic and empathetic leadership behavior, and interesting enough, led to creating a shared language of emotional intelligence across the leadership group. So in short, by incorporating a measure like the EQI, the company gained incredible insight into the emotional and interpersonal capabilities of their team that was really critical to navigate this ongoing organizational drive and change. Then the third and final case study, as I've mentioned at the start of the conversation, is probably one of the most strategic parts of the talent process, where the idea is, how do we identify your future talent, the individuals with the ability to be stretched, which is such a critical function of strategic succession planning. Now, in this specific scenario, we look at how companies would typically approach identifying high potential individuals in their business and how they typically support them in developing them, typically accelerated development to ensure that they're ready for the next step. And the core purpose is to ensure that there's leadership depth and continuity, especially in fast-growing organizations across South Africa. Your succession planning is a very structured process, or should typically be a very structured process that forms part of your annual talent cycle. And you can use tools like 9-box grids to actually visualize where individuals are placed within a talent landscape. Now, again, within South Africa, some of the challenges that our clients face include that on executive level, we still have a low number of high potential diversity candidates that are ready to take that next step. Some of the practices are still quite subjective still, where individuals are just nominated based on gut feel without real science basing the decisions around talent placement. And then there's still the pervasive problem of talent retention, especially with individuals that in a very small talent pool, the potential of being poached by others will always be there. So for this case study, our client is one of the leading and most innovative banks in South Africa, and has a staff complement of around 17,000 and is really a market leader when it comes to innovation within the financial services industry. The executive team embarked on a project called Future Fit that formed the basis of their strategic succession planning in the business. And the intent of this project was really to identify, develop, and prepare their high potential leaders for future positions on senior management level. And the commitment was, if we can identify objectively the talent that is really fit for purpose for the future, we will be able to support them with a leadership capability to ensure that they're ready for the next step, ensure that we have a robust internal talent pipeline for the critical roles. But all of this decision-making is based on objective assessment of readiness. Each of the high potential individuals that were nominated to participate in the process went through a very structured assessment process. And the end state was really to answer 3 questions. Who out of this cohort has the highest potential? How far are they from ready? And what are their strengths and development areas that need to be addressed? So from an EQI perspective, to enhance the process, the EQI actually performed an incredibly important part of the assessment process. Over 140 individuals were assessed, and they were provided with both individual feedback, and all of the insights were consolidated into a group trends report. So for each individual, a range of psychometric assessments were included to give us an indication of competence potential, EQI, incredibly important in that part of the process, but then also a lens around displayed competence, where individuals were given an opportunity to show how fit they already are, to show the leadership behavior through a various range of simulations. So again, the thinking was that if we can identify individuals who exhibit strong emotional social competencies, we can support the client with effectively pinpointing those with potential to succeed, but also support them to say, but what do they need to be able to succeed? And by integrating your emotional intelligence into these future leaders is not only a technical capability, but also ensures that your future leaders are emotionally attuned, adaptable, and also are equipped to lead with empathy and resilience. Now, interesting, if we think about the outcomes of the insights, the collective results over the 140 people, and we've subsequently assessed more, so the group is much bigger than this now, but the collective results have actually identified that from an emerging talent perspective or a succession perspective, the leaders generally displayed quite high emotional intelligence, which really supports the contribution towards creating a culture of psychological safety and innovation. And they would then tend to be able to manage their emotions more effectively by demonstrating resilience and focus under pressure. On the self-actualization and drive side, the group was found to find deep meaning and purpose in their work, so they take it extremely seriously, and that then exhibits the strong drive for excellence. But interesting enough, while this is incredibly insightful and powerful, the insights on the EQI also show that there are specific areas of development in that the group needs to find the balance between ambition and realism by ensuring that the expectations that they set for their team remain achievable and sustainable. So it doesn't help you have a leader that is extremely innovative and that drive this incredible aspirational goal, but the team that needs to support them in achieving this is unsure around the expectations and sometimes feel that it's unachievable and unsustainable. A second area of strength identified was around problem solving and decision making. So again, this leadership cohort very adept to find a solution and tackle problems heads on and just get it solved. However, the data flagged that a potential risk was there that they almost become overly decisive and emotionally detached. So the focus is so much on making the decision and moving on without really taking into consideration that there are other factors, including consultation with individuals, that might be incredibly important insights before final decisions are made. From an empathy and a relationship management perspective, those were two of the key areas from a development side that were identified. So again, interesting enough, linking it to the second scenario, some of the leaders really struggled with articulating or appreciating others' perspectives. So this almost lack or deficit in empathy and relational awareness was identified as a key capability for the future leadership effectiveness and a critical focus of the leadership development journey that the individuals embarked on. Now, all of these insights were validated by the company's employee engagement survey, which showed a similar pattern. So leaders were perceived as very driven and make a plan and solve problems, but sometimes tended to be experienced a little bit unrealistic and not fully in tune with their team needs. By using the EQI, the bank with the other assessments gained real objective, actionable data that ensured that the executive team could with comfort invest $1 million, well, it was probably about a 2 to 3 million rand project to ensure that there's focused succession planning and development directed towards cultivating a leadership footprint that aspires to create an environment that is not only performance driven, but also creates an environment that is conducive and empathetic of others. Now, through all of these scenarios, there are definitely 7 key insights that I think I would like to share as some key takeaways on not just the importance of considering something like emotional intelligence as a key construct throughout your talent strategy, but how an instrument as powerful as the EQI can support you in identifying the elements that need to be addressed. And I think firstly, as my first key learning or aha moment that I would like to share with you is we've established that emotional intelligence is not just a soft skill. It is actually a measurable driver of workplace effectiveness and leadership success, even beyond just looking at IQ. Again, important then is to remember that EQ complements, it doesn't replace IQ and personality. It tells you how effectively a person can manage people and complexity, and it is also trainable. That is a massive benefit. So if it is trainable, again, when you look at showing a return on investment, if emotional intelligence is trainable and can be developed, it can support you to shift the behavior of your individual to achieve measurable return on investment, not only on an individual level, but also for the collective team and the organization. And again, then, if we then look at return on investment and actionable insights, a measurement like the EQI can actually become an actionable tool for organizations. So it gives you data that help you not only make the right selection decision, but also support you with strong psychometrics to inform decision-making around selection, development, and further progression of individuals within the business. My fifth key learning that I would like to share with you today is, again, to think about your emotional intelligence journey as not just a point in time when I need to select somebody. So it shouldn't end at selection. Your EQ assessment and your integration of your data insights should be a living data source that informs continuous development, coaching, and succession planning conversations on an individual, team, and organizational level. And for those of us who operate within the South African context, with a measure like the EQI, it actually makes it incredibly value adding to ensure that with our high pressure, our diverse and complex environment, we can ensure by using an instrument like the EQI, we can determine and assess for adaptability and resilience in our current and our future leaders. And then finally, the overall benefit is clear. Emotional intelligence can drive the return on investment across your talent pipeline. So whether you use an instrument like the EQI or you measure emotional intelligence as part of a recruitment initiative for graduates or executives, or you can use the insights beyond selection to accelerate onboarding, leadership development, and even reduce burnout in individuals. It is really important to really think about, it's not just measuring and developing EQ, but it is also important to think about, if you don't look at it, what are you missing as part of your performance picture? Thank you so much for your attention, and I hope you found the conversation insightful.
Let's move on to the Q&A portion of today's session. Somebody had asked, how is your organization currently using emotional intelligence in talent acquisition or development?
So typical client scenarios, if I think about selection, the emotional intelligence component would be a core part of the measurement framework that is consulted or discussed with the client at the beginning of the process. So usually where we start is before we select the instruments, we determine what is the behavior that you want to see in a selection process. Obviously, what are the key competencies or behavior that will set the person up for success. And then based on those competencies, we will then determine and support the client to map and behind the scene the most appropriate instruments. And here again, EQI is typically, especially when it comes to executive and senior leader recruitment, quite a valuable tool to look at those underlying leadership behavior that supports individuals, not only within current leadership roles, but also to be able to navigate complex environments of change. Within a development journey, similar approach, look at either identifying specific leadership behavior that needs to be developed, using the EQI as part of a full selection battery or a development or assessment battery that supports the development feedback, and then integrating the insights from the instrument, if we look at descriptions, to integrate it into the individual's development report. But we've also had instances where clients have said, we want to specifically focus on EQ, and then the EQ as an instrument is incredibly value adding, and the insights through some of those various reports that I've mentioned earlier in the presentation is then brought into a conversation and feedback to the individual to customize their own individual development journey. But it also then links back to the topics and how the development or workshops are structured to support the individual to actually get very specific insights and support throughout the process.
Beautiful. So I'm going to ask you another question just to go a little bit deeper. So which sub-skills do you believe are most critical for leadership development? You did touch on that. And so what would you focus on specifically?
From a leadership perspective, from a leadership development perspective.
Correct.
Fantastic. Yeah, again, it's interesting. I think if you ask me my personal opinion, I'll share that with you. But again, it's really in consultation with our clients. We typically determine what would be fit for purpose for them in their specific scenario or their specific case. If I reflect back on some of the case studies that I've shared, I think again, some of the key components that have come out around some of the elements really speaks to things like social responsibility, assertiveness, and impulse control, I think again becomes incredibly important if you think about high stress environments and what individuals actually need to be able to deal with in a leadership position. But then this ability to navigate complexity, be able to make decisions, but also consult with others, that fine balance between the independence and reality testing become also something very critical to determine that balance between setting the vision, but also ensuring that you partner with individuals and you take them on the journey. And again, if I reflect back on some of the insights that I've shared with specifically the case study with this South African bank, it doesn't help that you have an individual that is very comfortable to make decisions, drive the vision and set a very specific vision in mind and comfortable to take people on the journey, but individuals don't experience that behavior. So I would say between social awareness, assertiveness, impulse control around dealing with, understanding the context, being aware of and being cognizant of others' responses, being able to manage your behavior or response to it, but also more importantly, to find that balance between being independent, being able to make decisions, but also doing that acid test, reality testing, ensuring that people are on the path with you. I think to find those balance would be, for me, almost the key elements that I would focus on what I would recommend people focus on as a first priority.
Perfect. Thank you, Jana. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask if you've experienced any challenges or roadblocks when embedding the EQI into a talent strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always about how people receive the feedback. So again, it's this thing about having a perception around what you think you are able to do and how people experience you, and then receiving feedback that are maybe not what you expected. So I'm sure that all the professionals on the call have had that experience. So again, on the one side, it probably validates if there are certain areas of development from an EQ perspective that you would find some of that resistance, but it is really in that conversation to support the individual in understanding, what are the practical examples? How does it play out? And then obviously if one introduces something like a 360, it's not just your self-assessment or an instrument that gives you the feedback, you also get the insights from others. But it's really around that awareness of and the openness for the feedback that I think is probably some of the bigger challenges that one experiences with anything, but more specifically with EQ, in your conversations with individuals and being open for the feedback.
That's perfect. Thank you, Jana. I'm going to try to get in one more question before we have to wrap. Really quickly, what are your top recommendations for embedding emotional intelligence into an organization for culture improvement? Where would somebody begin?
Oh, that's a difficult question on a Thursday evening.
Yeah.
So I think it all starts with, so for me, it all starts with your what does your culture mean? If you are somebody, explain to me, you have a culture and values. What is your elevator speech? What does it look like? What would you experience? What do you need to see to be able to describe your culture? And then I think, again, when we then look at that language, is to help the client build the language between, if this is your culture and your values and what you expect people to, this is what I want to see to be in my experience with individuals, to help them build the link back to then something like an EQI and how that could then be measured or assessed. But again, it's all about the golden thread. It doesn't help that you only look at EQ when you select somebody, but you don't have the same approach and thinking around, but how do I then use it for development? Or how do I use it as part of my performance management process? Or do I recognize this behavior and are people actually remunerated or rewarded appropriately? So for me, it is, if we look at from a culture perspective, the biggest challenge that we experience with our clients is that they have these incredible mission statements and values and big stickers on the wall, but they actually haven't made it very practical to say, if you need to explain to somebody in an elevator, you're going down an elevator and you've got 5 floors, how would you explain that in very layman's terms? What do you want to see and experience to show that this is the values and people are living the values and they fit for our culture? And then to ensure that values is part of your recruitment, development, performance management, and reward process. Because it doesn't help that you recruit against a certain set of behavior, but people don't experience it when they are in a leadership position. And contrary, leadership behavior is rewarded as part of a reward strategy. So that golden thread between your values, your mission, your culture, and then the behavior that supports recruitment, development, performance management, and subsequently reward should be part of that footprint as a golden thread throughout the process.